So cute. Hello, I'm Stamatina, but you can call me Matina, like Latina with an M. And today's musings are brought to you from Bali, Indonesia, specifically Ubud, North Ubud. I don't even know where I am. I just popped in a location in the map and said, yeah, that looks good. Someone even on their motorbike asked me where I was going as we were stopped in traffic, and I said, I don't know, I'm on an adventure. So I guess we'll just start with some ramblings about the adventure of life. One of the downloads that I had on the bike as well was, as I've just recently moved here to Bali and trying to get my feet up off the ground, I'm just thinking about how wonderful this school of life is, and the school of Bali and the school of Indonesia and the school of travel and the school of nature and the school of Ubud and the school of the river and the school of other people and the school of relationships and everything in between as it comes to our daily life. And I think how grateful I am to be in this particular school, because I have been in so many different variations of education in my life. Of course, the standard primary school, high school, university. I guess you could say I've been to 3 different universities. I received my undergrad, my Bachelor of Law, well, my double degree, my Bachelor of Law and International Relations at UNSW in Sydney. And then I did an exchange program for 1 semester at the University of Connecticut in the US. And then I came back, finished my degree in Sydney, and then I did a postgrad for my College of Law, which is the equivalent of a postgrad diploma, like a graduate diploma in legal practice to practice law. And, I've done other certifications in yoga, in life coaching, in music production, in business, studying business, and I'm sure lots of other things in between, different colleges that I've been to. It's all a blur now. After you reach past 30, it's all a bit of a blur, right? Anyways, I've done a lot of study. But, nothing teaches you like life and travel and being alone specifically. I've been on many different pilgrimages in my life as well, being alone. I'm an only child to begin with, so I'm very used to and comfortable with being a loner. I actually prefer it. I didn't grow up with much family. It was just mum, dad, and I in Sydney. All of mum's family was and still is in Indonesia, so she was the only one to move out of her home country. And same with dad, actually, except he had an auntie to come over to he came over to Canberra before he did. And so we had extended relatives in Canberra, which is 3 hours away from Sydney, a different state. So we had no family. I had no family in Sydney apart from mum and dad. We had extended family in a different state that we saw maybe once or twice a year for Easter and Christmas, and eventually over the years, and especially as life went on. I'm just mindful of the ants here because as an Aussie, I just feel like everything is trying to kill me. Everything from nature. But maybe that's another lesson too that I'll get to in a second. So maybe remind me about that in the comments if I forget to talk about it. Anyways, I've been a loner. I've been on many pilgrimages. I did a gap year after my first year of full-time work as a lawyer. Actually, it was about 15 months of travel. And then I guess you could say during my exchange program at university, I also was alone even though, I was around other students as well, but I did that myself away from family. And now, on my latest adventure, I am living in Bali solo, despite recently having gotten married to my husband in November. And, most people would think, oh, that's wild, that's crazy, what are you doing? But this is just where I need to be right now, specifically because my Indonesian mother passed away early 2025, and this is one of the many reasons why I'm here, to heal. Actually, the name Ubud, the town Ubud, is named after the word Ubad, which means medicine or healing. And so, there are sacred codes in this land for that. And that's why a lot of people come here for that and seek that and have that and gain that. So I'm here for many reasons: to connect with my ancestry, my heritage, my culture, my motherland, brushing up on my Bahasa, and again, find myself, as I have been doing time after time after time through iteration of death that I've been experiencing since I was a child. And I realize I've been very comfortable with the theme of death because I've been around it my whole life, metaphorically, literally. So I guess in terms of literally, you could say that my first initiation of almost seeing death flash before my eyes was actually when I was 4 years old, and I saw my father be physically abusive to my mother. And at the time, that was when my yaya, my dad's mum, was visiting from Greece for the first time. And luckily, she was in the household to drag me away from the scene physically, out of the house, until that was over, because if she wasn't there, then I would have, stayed to see the whole thing. Luckily, Mum survived, and, they separated at the time. They ended up getting back together, and they stayed together till the end, till death did they part. But I was confronted with the potential death of my mother at 4 years old. And I saw her life and my life flash before my eyes. And so life began for me, really. You could say that I started growing up then at 4 years old. Maybe I had, I remember being told I was an old soul since I can remember. And I don't know if it was that particular moment that made me feel, made me more mature than others growing up. It made me appear more mature to others. I'm definitely an old soul, but I had so many experiences that matured me over the years. Many different forms of abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, mental, spiritual. I don't need to get into all of them right now. But what I'm trying to say is that life is our greatest teacher, because life implies death, right? And death implies life. And so through that experience, I learnt all about life, what it means to live, not just to survive, but to eventually persevere out of the ashes from death, right? Metaphorical. And eventually I experienced my own physical father's death, and of course, in the end, my own mother's physical death last year, as I mentioned. So dad was in 2011, mum was in 2025. And again, I found myself alone, without my parents, without any family. Of course, I had and have my husband. But these sorts of journeys, you need to kind of experience to some degree yourself, right? And I think that's why I needed to be here, physically separate from him, to grasp everything, make sense of everything myself without the noise and distractions, despite of the best intentions, despite loving of, you know, other people. And I guess what I wanted to talk about was just how life teaches you in its many weird and wonderful ways. You know, a lot of people might think, well, this is just wacky, you know, you're a newlywed, you're here by yourself, and you've left your husband. But this is just one way that life, through this experience, is teaching me something and teaching him something about death and rebirth, and how can we be reborn after death. Because we come into this world alone, even though it's through our mother and father, but we die alone as well. And I think the reason so many people are afraid to live is because they're afraid to die. And because they're not comfortable with dying, metaphorical death, you know? And I've metaphorically died at least 18 times in this lifetime, maybe more. I think that's an under-exaggeration for sure. Definitely 2.5 ego deaths. I'm in the process of one ego death right now, one dark night of the soul, another spiritual awakening. I would say the first one was probably my dad's death. The second one was 2020, my spiritual awakening then. And now is probably the grieving process of my mother's death. But this next evolution of my ascension, my spiritual awakening journey, because I'm getting to almost the 7-year mark since 2020. And as you may or may not know, 7 is a very divine number. We have 7 days of the week, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 chakras. 7 is a very divine number. And so I'm realizing that on my spiritual path, it's almost 7 years since my first spiritual awakening, where I awoke to the understanding of who I really am, which is all, which is unconditional love, infinite intelligence, which is an infinite frequency of love that I, as the physical human being Martina, could never, ever, ever comprehend or understand, fully comprehend or understand, and I'm not meant to. And such is the irony of this experience. And so anyways, since having that understanding, true understanding of who I am at 2020, now I'm evolving into the next level of that understanding. I was at level 1 for 7 years, which I believe most people, I think everyone stays in, because it's a sacred journey, right? This spiral of evolution, of understanding of who we are. And you don't just get there. You don't just arrive. You don't just read a book and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. You don't just even experience one loss in your life and you're like, okay, I understand love. Or I understand life. You know, that's our ego talking. And so now I'm being pushed into this next level, level 2 of the spiritual awakening, as I approach 2027, and shit is getting real. And, you know, I thought I knew it all. I've lost both my parents. I'm an only child. I'm very okay with being alone. I've lost all my friends. I've lost my old identity. So many different careers and jobs and occupations. And even the word occupation, right? When I say it out loud, I'm like, oh, that comes from the root word to occupy. What does that mean? Am I being occupied by time, by money, by a corporation, by greed? That word in itself, like, does something to me. It triggers me because I'm like, I am not being occupied by anything that is not divine. If anything, the only thing that I am being occupied right now is God, myself, my connection to Source, Universal, God, Source, Energy, the Most High, consciousness. Whereas before, yeah, I had an occupation because I was occupied by greed, by money, by ego, by the desire for reputation, the desire of anything that doesn't serve me and my highest good. That comes from a lower consciousness, which is status, which is how I'm being perceived, which is my reputation in the community, which is how I'm being seen by family and friends, which is a false matrix, a false identity. But as I let all that go years ago, I no longer have an occupation. I have a sense of service to the divine, to others, to myself, through my spirit, my soul, which is the complete opposite of that matrix, the light matrix, the true matrix of love, of service, of healing, of betterment, of truth, of alignment. And that could only happen through the many life lessons of death, the teachings of death in this life. Ego death, death of relationships, death of community, death of identity, death of materials around me, loss of materials around me, death of understanding, of a commitment to ways of thinking, habits, attachments that were not me, that I thought were me, but really were programs inbuilt into me through the false education that I received, whether that be through university, high school, primary school. These are false programs inbuilt into us, programmed into us to say, you're a good worker, or you want to be a good worker, you want to be a very good hard worker, so you can achieve XYZ, so other people can think this of you. So, you can have this perception of yourself that you are successful, that you are God. So I let go of all the false education that I received, and I returned to the only true education, myself and my alignment with a higher source, which is an extension of me / I am an extension of source, meaning God, meaning energy, meaning the frequency of love, unconditional love, to be exact. It's kind of like, I used to be a lawyer, like I said, so if you want to go to a lawyer, you go to a law school to learn how to be a lawyer. And I did that, and I still felt unfulfilled. Like, there was a part of me that was potentially achieved or understood, but I was like, I still feel so empty inside and hollow. That only scratched a sliver of a surface of who I am. Let me try something else. So I did a program for music education, and I learned how to produce music, comp my own vocals as a singer. And still, again, as an artist, I was like, I am so much more than this. I'm not just this. I'm not just a software engineer. I'm not just a singer. I'm not just a teller of stories. What else? So I went to a business school, and I learned how to start a business. And again, I was like, I'm going back to my old ways. Like, I'm not a business owner. I'm not somebody who is in the business of being in a business. I am myself. How can I be more of myself? And so then I started going more and more inwards. I started self-reflecting, journaling. This was my spiritual awakening, right? 2020. So my dark night of the soul. And I started returning to myself, nature, like this. And then I realized I just started learning how to be, right? Because God, the most high energy, universe, consciousness wants us just to be. It doesn't want us to be anything. So the universe doesn't want us to be anything. It doesn't want us to achieve anything. I mean, we kind of place that expectation on ourselves, right? I told myself, oh, I have to be the most successful person, so I gotta be a lawyer. Or I want to help as many people as possible, so I gotta be a lawyer. And so, yeah, we go to these different schools, let's say in life, receiving different education, still not feeling truly fulfilled, or that we know, or that we're discovering who we really are, or arriving at who we really are. Because, yeah, I've been to an art school, let's say, and did not find myself. And I'm sure a lot of artists feel the same way. You don't really find yourself in a school. So the school of life teaches us how to be. And when you truly do that and you truly sit with yourself and nature, hopefully, as I have, you will arrive at the understanding of who you truly are, which is multidimensional, which is multifaceted, which is unlimited, which is limitless. Because if we all come from the same source, which is unlimited energy, unlimited consciousness, what I'm trying to say is that most people seek an outside education, something outside of them, to tell them how to be. Whereas there's no outside force that can teach you how to be yourself. That comes through your own life experience. And so I believe that the majority of people are in external education systems as opposed to an internal education system, right? The majority of people are not sitting in nature for guidance, for answers. They're not asking themselves and connecting to their own intuition for an answer, which all our news source comes from here. Everything else is fake news, literally. Because, I mean, that's what all the indigenous people and tribes know, right? They have survived and thrived off the land through their own intuition and guidance system, through the plants, through nature, through plant medicine. They call it plant medicine for a reason, right? Since the beginning of time. And that's because they have this connection to source, a direct line to source that no other information source can sway their knowing. It's not even opinion, it's their knowing of what is truth. And in fact, I was just reading today that scientists have now just discovered, I believe it's plasma that sits around the solar plexus area of the body, that they are now calling, I think it's called something like an instituum or something like that, which is essentially an intelligence, a network intelligence that can warn you against danger, against anything that is untrue. So essentially intuition. So as of today, today's the 17th of May, 2026, science has now only caught up to Eastern knowing and Eastern understanding, which is that we all have an internal guidance system. We all have intuition. Any female can tell you this. Any woman can tell you this. You know, there's this thing called female intuition. Can you prove it? No, well, I could tell you through my experience, out of all the times that I have made myself say hello, out of circumstances where I shouldn't have made it out alive, shouldn't have, made it through all those experiences, simply because of my intuition. So females could have told you this a long time ago. Natives could have told you this a long time ago. We all have intuition. Now, the thing is, how do you connect to your intuition? Well, what have the natives been doing since the beginning of time? Being out in nature, being away from the screens. And we're seeing this epidemic, right? So many people are, rejecting social media and trying to find community offline rather than online. We're just coming out of the Zoom era of 2020 and now into the physical community era as we evolve into this next collective stage of the awakening, which I believe it wasn't just me, right, who had that first stage, level 1 in 2020. There was a bunch of us, and now the rest of the population are catching up who didn't have that first awakening in 2020 but are now having it now. And so the ones who experienced it, initially in 2020 or even before, some of the hippies back in the 70s, it's now our responsibility and duty to help educate others by way of example by getting back out into nature. Hence why I moved from Sydney to Ubud, from Australia to Indonesia, from Western society to Eastern society, from the false programming and beliefs that I need this big city smoke, I need the comfort, the luxury, and get back out into what I truly need. This. So I hope something resonated, and I'll catch you next time. Take care of yourself. Love you.